All right, guys, welcome back. Thanks for coming back yet another week. So, here is the review of the week. This one is not an Apple Podcast review of the week. This is one that was just sent to me privately. So, this is from a member of the Ascent group. So, kind of a smaller private group where we're getting together and help guys move up and climb the mountain. A lot of times, what we do is just go along the road with our head down, and wherever it takes us, that's where we go. So, these guys have actually picked a destination they want to get to and are climbing together. And it's been super cool. So this is from a member who kind of lacked confidence, lacked direction, had a lot of willpower, was willing to endure quite a bit, but felt like he was stagnant in life. So this is where this one comes in. He's been in the group for 3 weeks now, and he says, I feel like progress is really going great. I feel like I'm starting to see what I actually need to do. And that's a big deal for me. So knowing this guy and seeing his confidence level in just 3 weeks go from being lost and directionless to now having a course and a path that he's charting and a lot better habits. So the guest that I've got on, I think we're going to talk habits and systems and things like that as well. But it's really cool when you put a plan in place and have guys around you that help move you in that direction and hold you accountable. So, all right, that is it for the review of the week. And now time to move on to our special guest. So I've got, well, he's got a podcast. It's called Just a Guy in the Pew. And that's like the perfect way to introduce John Edwards. So if you've ever been to a church and just sat there at a pew and kind of listened and observed and whatever, and not taken action and thought to yourself, man, I should probably do something. That's what we're going to hear from John Edwards is a life story that has had some crazy success. And then, some severe challenges. And then kind of once you hit the bottom and climb your way out of it, what that looks like. So rather than run his story, I'm going to let him go. So welcome to the Journey of a Christian Dad podcast. Everybody, John Edwards.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thank you, my friend. It's been an honor to be with you. I know we've talked about this for a while, so it's great to have a chance to be with you, and just so happy to see what you got going on, and how well your podcast is doing, and you do a great job, man, and you're a great example to a lot of people. So I appreciate that as a brother in the Lord and brother in Christ to see somebody else out there walking the line too, and trying to bring others with them. So attaboys to you on everything you're doing.
Oh, thank you. So I did not know you when you were in the pit.
Sure.
But I feel like after you had climbed out a little bit and got a little bit of traction and direction in life, I feel like we connected somewhere early on in that journey. So
yeah,
and you've just grown and shared so much since. So being authentic is one of the keys to what you do, and me as well. So living an authentic lifestyle where you don't have to remember which face you're supposed to put on at which event you're at and the people you're in front of. So I applaud you for just being able to share who you are, like in a very, very real way, and not hiding things that other guys typically do hide. So
sure. It's been a blessing, but yeah, we can jump into the story, whatever you want to do, man. Like wherever you want to start, we'll go from there. You lead and I'll follow, my brother.
All right. So I'll kind of intro it up just a bit. You're a larger size guy who is blessed with some athletic talent. So us as men, a lot of us like to be athletes, like to play, like to compete, like to perform, like to do the best at what we can. And then we get to a spot where things change and we realize we're limited by different things. And so you're a pretty dang good athlete.
Yeah, I mean, I was a good basketball player. I played a lot of sports growing up. I mean, I played football. I wasn't never really in love with football until I got older. Like, I mean, I really enjoy it now, just watching it and playing with my son and stuff like that. But when I was a kid, I just really wasn't into it. And I just think it's because I didn't really went around it much. I didn't understand the rules a lot, and just the coach, we went to a small private school. So like every kid had to play every sport just to have a team. And so I was like the guy who threw in his like defensive end and had no idea what I was doing. So, but I did that for a little bit. And another way to stay in shape, throughout the seasons of the year. But I pitched, playing baseball, really enjoyed playing baseball a lot more than I enjoy watching it. I'm a bigger, fan of playing than I am watching that sport. But basketball was always my love. My dad was really, really good. He was, still holds records in the state of Mississippi. He
Oh,
went to
wow.
Ole Miss to play there and got drafted as soon as he got to Ole Miss into the Army. So he wasn't able to actually play very long there. But there were a lot of people that said he could have played in the NBA,
Huh.
and he had like a 50-point game in high school. I mean, this is back in, he was born in 41. So, this is back in the 60s and stuff and in the 50s. And he was really good. And 6-foot guy, I'm 6'8". I don't know really where that came from. I've got a sister that's 6 foot and one that's 5'6", and my mom was 5'4". So I don't know. I just kind of happened, but yeah, grew up playing ball, was 5'10" till I was about 15 years old, played guard until that point. And then all of a sudden when I, between 15 and 16, went to get my driver's license, I grew 6 inches. And so I was 6'4" a year later. But I still had the skill set of a guard. So a lot of people would think you'd be in the post, and I get asked
Right.
that a lot. Did you play center? And I did when they put me there, but for the most part, I played guard.
Wow.
Enjoyed it growing up, man. That's how my stress reliever, man. Whenever something would go wrong in my life, or I was dealing with something, school issues, things like that, I'd get outside on the court and I'd shoot for hours, and I'd probably shoot 1,000 shots and never knew I shot that many because I was just in a zone with it. And
Hmm.
just a refuge for me. Played a lot of church leagues and then got into school and played up through high school and really want to play in college, but it didn't work out for a couple different reasons. I had some injuries and things like that, but God has a different plan for all of us. I still enjoy playing every once in a while. I got a little arthritis in both feet, so I got to be careful of that. But yeah, it was something I grew up loving to do, and had a lot of friends and a lot of teamwork building,
What
through
was
that
your
playing
what
ball.
was your dad like? You mentioned he was instrumental in your
Yeah,
sports side.
sure.
What
Well,
was he
he
like
was.
just overall?
So I love my dad to death, and I tell him that as much as I can. But my dad was born and raised on a farm in Mississippi, one of 6 kids, and he was one of 2 boys, the youngest of all of them. And a lot of ways they were raised as farm hands. I didn't know this until I was older, a couple of years ago actually, but his parents didn't get along very well. They fought and they fussed all the time, and his siblings were a lot older than him, so they were married off, and while he was still in high school and coming up through college. And he wound up actually getting out of the army, was honorably discharged because my grandfather's hand got caught in a cotton gin and it ripped
Oh,
off 4
wow.
of his fingers. And so someone had to go home and help with the farm. And one of the first things he told them when he went back was, I grew up in this house listening to nothing but yelling and fighting and all this. And if that starts again, then I'm gone. I'm not going to stay here. And I never knew that growing up. They never told us that, but I knew that there was something different between my mom's side of the family and my dad's. My mom's family was very loving, very hugging, kissing, just, crawling up in my mom's lap, things like that, as a young boy. And that side of the family, there was a lot of that. But on my dad's, I didn't realize I was older that him and his brothers and sisters, there weren't a lot of hugs and, love you and checking on each other. I mean, they had relationships, but it wasn't close like that, and so, growing up, my dad and I had a great relationship as far as loving each other, but he never really said it much. I knew my dad loved me because he worked his tail off. He would leave. He worked at Napa Auto Parts and retired from there after 45 years. He started working in a warehouse and worked his way up to a bookkeeper and all of those things. And he wound up, could have worked at headquarters from what everybody told me. He just never wanted to leave Memphis because my mother was an only child and he didn't want to take her away from her family. Um, but yeah, my dad growing up on a farm. He worked hard. I mean, he taught himself how to play basketball. He built a dirt court in the middle of a field. He built his own basketball goal. He built a track to run around it to stay in shape. He bought a cow from his grandfather or from his father and then wound up making money on it and buying more. He just was always a hard worker. And so with him, everything was like your word's your bond. A
Yep.
man puts his head down, he works hard, he never complains, he doesn't need anybody or anything. And that was sort of the mentality I grew up with. And so a lot of my life, I spent looking for the affirmation of my father. He would show up to my games, and do things like that. But there were also times where it just seemed like no matter what I could do, it wasn't ever good enough. I remember I had a game where I scored a lot of points my ninth grade year, and one of the best games I ever played. And I wound up missing a free throw during the game. Uh, that week, he had told me to get my hair cut. I had hair back then. and and he told me to get my hair cut, and I didn't. And this free throw was towards the end of the game. It was real sweaty. My hair was sticking to my forehead. And I shot my first free throw, made it. And the second one, I moved my hair out of my way like that, and I shot the free throw and I missed it. Now, Dad, a lot of nights would come to our games, and then he would drive back to work because he might work till midnight. He was the type guy that if this is what needs to get done today, I'm going to be here until it's done. He'd leave and go to our games, but go back to work. So, but he always was like, whoever played the game, they're riding with him, and he would drive us home and then go back to work. Everybody else rode with Mom.
Ooh.
And so I was like, this is the night, man. Like, I'm gonna finally hear, like, man, I'm so proud of you and all those things. And got in the truck and was just sitting there like a giddy kid going, this is it. I've been waiting on it all these nights where I've been told what I didn't do right and all this, and we're finally gonna hear that from him. And he just waited a few minutes, turned out onto the street, and he said, man, if you cut your hair, you would have missed that free throw. And my heart was just crushed, because I'm like, this is the best game I've ever played to this point, and all you see is the one thing I did wrong, and so my dad and I had a relationship like that for a long time in our life where I sought his approval so much. But one of the reasons after the injury that I quit basketball was because I got tired of playing, because I wasn't playing for me. I was playing for him and his aspirations and what he wanted me to do. And I had height that he didn't have. I had skill, and he wanted me to really progress in all those things and have a life of basketball. And I came home from high school one night and just was sick of it, after the injuries and all those things. And I was just like, I don't want to play anymore. And it was one of the worst fights we ever had in our life. It was a blow up in our kitchen. My mom was sitting in there, and I was always sort of afraid of my dad. He was a very strong disciplinarian. I mean, we got spanked a lot with anything, switches, hairbrushes, floss water handles, whatever. And that's just the way that they were raised. You don't behave, you're going to get a spanking. My dad didn't believe in a lot of grounding and stuff taken away. So long story short, I was always a little afraid of my dad, and I never really, barked back at him. Well, that night I did. And I told him that, I didn't want to play anymore. And I was tired of playing for him, that I'd lost my desire to play. And if I did play, I wanted to play in a church league with my friends and things like that. And he just kept telling me, the things dads will tell you: if you quit now, you'll be a quitter the rest of your life. You're this, that kind of stuff. And I just stopped in that moment and I just yelled at him and said, are you ever going to tell me you love me? Are you ever going to tell me you're proud of me? Am I ever going to be good enough for you? And I had even gone into, at that time of my life, working for Napa because I wanted to be like my dad. He was my hero, and that's why it was so important for me to hear those things from him. But I didn't a lot. So, nowadays, as he's gotten older, he's softened a lot, and there's a lot of I love yous and a lot of I'm proud of yous. And my mother passed, years ago, and I think that kind of opened his eyes up to a lot of things too. But we have a great relationship. But it was tough growing up with him, with some of that just gruff, no excuses, disciplinarian, authoritative kind of father.
Yeah. I see that one both ways. Looking for the approval of our dad, no matter what age that we are. And then at the same time, as we're raising our own kids, what does that car ride home from the game sound like?
Yeah.
What are our affirmations? What are our praise of our kids? And, what are we emphasizing that they're doing? The negative, the positive, the practices, hey, I saw you, practice a lot this week, and you made that shot, you hit the free throw, you guarded that kid, and you're at a higher level than you were at the beginning of the season or whatever, because of the intentions and because of the actions and practices, not the result of the behavior.
Sure. Yeah, it is. It's important to build up, children like that. I mean, you don't know how people hear things. I can remember, I wasn't very good at math, and my father was great at math. And I remember one night he was watching a ball game, and that's what he liked to do when he was at home. He wanted to watch a ball game, and that's, don't get in front of the TV, don't, that kind of stuff. And so I asked him for help, and he quickly showed me something, and too quick for me to get when I was in fourth grade or something.
Right.
And, and I went back in there and tried it, and then kind of meekly walked back in and said, I still don't understand. And I remember him looking at me, and I'm sure that he regrets this, but he looked at me and he said, "Are you on drugs or something?" And I was in fourth grade, and I just, to this day, when I think that memory, I could feel like a knife going into my heart, and going, no, I just don't understand. And I'm not as good at it as you are. And I wish I was more important than this game right now that you're watching. And so with my children, like I've caught myself saying things, and I'll say, man, like I told myself I would never, say things like that. I'll hear my father come out through my voice. And that's the problem, man, is you get this this learned behavior, because it's what you were born with.
Yes.
The reason my father couldn't give the love the way that I wanted it was because he wasn't given love that way. And, if we're not careful, it can form how we look at God, especially for, men, because in being fathers, because, how children see their father is how they're going to see God the Father. If you're a disciplinarian, authoritative, punishing kind of father, then chances are that's how they're going to see God. So every time that I'm with my kids, I mean, it's just, hey, you did a bad thing, but you're not bad, right? God doesn't make bad things. You just made a bad decision, and we need to work on making better decisions.
Yes.
We do punish. They lose laptops and, video game privileges and all that kind of stuff. But we always, Angela and I have tried to work through and never say things like, that was stupid, because what people will hear is, you just called me stupid, not what I did stupid. You're calling me stupid. And so we try to stay away from those things and just sort of try to build up and affirm, discipline when we need to,
Yeah.
but always build up.
So fast forward a few years, you get
Yeah.
into, it sounds like the family business, so to speak. You get into
Sure.
sales and get married, and life
Yeah.
advances. What was it like when you went from, after high school and then got into what I would say adulthood and started
Yeah.
getting some responsibility and things? What changed from being a fourth grader not doing drugs to as you got
Being
older?
a 20-year-old doing them. Yeah. Yeah. I see you. I'm picking up what you're putting down there. So first of all, I was born and raised in Memphis. I was Baptist, 18 years of my life. I love the Lord. I love the church. My parents did a great job of having us there every time the doors were open. All my friends were there. I went to an Episcopal school because we live in Memphis, and the public school wasn't very nice. It wasn't very safe, where we were. So my parents worked hard to be able to send us to this Episcopal school. It was literally down the block from my house. And so I had a couple of different, lenses of Christianity as a youth, but the Baptist church is where I spent my time. I was vacation Bible school, mission trips. My weekends were spent helping at special friends camps with kids with special needs, things like that. And I loved it. And at one time in my life, I wanted to be a youth minister, because I had a great one who's now the pastor of that church I'm still in contact with. But that's how I kind of grew up. And at the time of 18, Memphis being in the middle of the South, it's just a melting pot for all these different universities that people's parents have gone to. So, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Kentucky, Alabama, Auburn. These places are all within like a 4-hour drive,
Okay.
if not that. And so a lot of people wind up in Memphis after college because it's one of the bigger cities in the South, and their kids want to go to those same schools. So when we were 18, all of a sudden this community I'd surrounded myself with starts going off to school. And I'd never thought about that. I thought, man, I want to be here forever, right? In this moment where we are. And my church,
I remember that time in my life too, where after high school, boom, everybody's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's lonely. And like my church was an older church. So you had the youth group, and then like the next Sunday school kind of thing was, my parents' age. And, you're 18, who wants to go be in Sunday school with your parents?
Right.
So I quit, really kind of going to church. I lost that community, and then I lost my desire to go to services on Sunday and things like that. Well, my dad looked at me and said, "What are you going to do? You're going to work at Napa, you're going to go to college, you're going to do both." And so I didn't know what I wanted to be. I was in love with the University of Memphis because of Penny Hardaway, and I just always wanted to play there and all those things. Larry Finch, Elliott Perry, all those guys that played there. My dad took me to all those games growing up. And so I just, that was always wanted to go there. So it's a commuter school anyway. I go, tell dad I'm going to go to college. He's paying for it. I go, and the first couple of weeks, I realized it was the loneliest I've ever been in my life. I was on campus with thousands of people and I didn't know a soul. And I was sitting in classes and, beautiful girls were in there and I tried talking to them and none of them would talk to me. I don't know if it's because I look like this or they just didn't, just weren't interested for other reasons, but, but I couldn't get anybody to talk to me. And I would go to work at Napa where I started when I was 16, work in a warehouse all day, lonely, and then go to school lonely, come home, be lonely. So, my sister had joined a sorority, 3 years before. She's 3 years older than me. And I knew one guy left in town that I knew had something to do with the fraternity. Well, it turns out he was a Rush chairman. And so I called him. He was great to be in high school, 3 years older than me, let me hang around with the seniors when I was a freshman. We were just always friends. So he said, yeah, we're going to have Rush Week, man. You ought to come out and join the fraternity. I think people would like you. So, at the time I drank a little bit in high school, not a lot, smoked a little bit of pot, but not enough to be dangerous. And I got in that fraternity and all that changed. You brought up my dad earlier. Looking back at it now, I was looking for affirmation. I was looking for somewhere to belong. I wanted people to like me. I wanted people to tell me I was cool, right? And to be part of a group. And when I speak to young people, I often talk about this, kids that are getting ready to go to college is, you're about to get freedom and you're excited about it. All these, I can't wait to get away from my parents, have my own thing, do my own thing, party if I want to, that kind of stuff. But freedom's a good thing if you know who you are. If you don't, then it's a very dangerous thing because you look to others to tell you who you are. And that's what happened. I'd started, making my way up at Napa. I was making about $35,000 a year as a warehouse manager, shipping manager at 20 years old, 19 years old. Had all the money in the world with no bills, and pretty soon everybody in the fraternity kind of figured that out. And I had all these friends, right? I could buy them alcohol, I could buy them drugs, I could get into clubs. I was willing to drive, it's stupid, not worrying about DUIs, things like that. And, so I started doing whatever made people like me. That was drinking, then it was smoking a lot more pot, and then it was pills, and then it was ecstasy, and then it was acid. And then I made a terrible decision in my life one night to do cocaine. I was at a house with a bunch of guys, been drinking all day, watching football, and didn't know that these guys did all that. You did that, it was the one thing I hadn't seen. And I was in a position where I was kind of drunk and didn't want to drive home. Memphis doesn't have a lot of taxis. There wasn't Uber or Lyft at the time. And so I walked back there looking for a ride and find these guys doing blow in the back of the house. And I go in there and make a dumb decision and join them. And, Dan, at that point, it was crazy. I never felt anything like that. Like I felt like I could run through a wall. I had those visions of like being a kid in the backseat of my parents' car, telling them I'd never do drugs and never drink, and all that stuff had gone out the window. I went home that night and I said, I'll never do that again. But that next Friday, I was with those guys again at a different house. And this time it wasn't in some back bedroom. It was right there on the coffee table. And I gave into peer pressure and I started doing it. And I did a bunch that night. And I started setting all these vows in my life, right? I'll never know the guy's number. I'll never call the guy. I'll never do it by myself. I'll never pay for it. All of those felt like dominoes. And the whole time at work, I'm moving up through this, right? Like I'm not the shipping manager anymore. Like I said, my dad worked there. Somebody complained that I got that job because of him, even though he stayed out of the discussions purposely for that. So they moved me to a training program, executive deal, and I wound up working as an assistant manager in a store for a couple of years, and then became an outside salesman and became very, very good at that. I was a Fortune 250 salesman of the year a couple of years in a row. I mean, it's out of 1,000 salespeople in a huge company, and just, man, was making a lot of money. And my habits just kept going. I quit going to school. I started getting goose eggs. My dad said, not paying for that anymore. So, I just went full time into this career as a salesperson and started to excel at it. Man, really at this time, it was the loneliest part of my life. I was a chameleon among men, from the outside looking in, I had everything. I was single. I had cars. I had different girlfriends. I had, all this stuff. I was womanizing, all of that stuff, and everybody's like, man, that guy's got the world by the tail. But nobody knew how broken and lonely and shameful and guilty and disgusted I was with myself. Because inside, I remembered the person I used to be, but I was just so into all this other stuff at the time. So, me and this group of guys, it started to get to where every Friday night where we were going to go out and look for girls, we never went out. We'd stay up till 5, 6, 7 in the morning doing cocaine, go to sleep, sleep through the day, go back and do it again the next night. I was a functioning drug addict, man. Like I could go to work and I was fine all day long, but 5 o'clock, man, it was time to go drink 15, 20 beers, do a bag of Coke, smoke a pack and a half of cigarettes.
Hmm.
So I was lonely in all of this time. So I found myself, falling into a pornography problem. A lot of the girls just quit coming around because when you're doing drugs, man, you're so worried that people are going to find out, so paranoid that you just quit doing things. You're basically spending your life on a couch, doing this kind of stuff. So I've become very lonely in my life. And in this one week, my little sister came into town and none of my family knew. I mean, my parents knew I drank too much and things like that, but they weren't aware of anything else. My sister came in town. She was playing volleyball at Carson Newman College in Jefferson City, Tennessee. And she came in and wanted to see some of my friends. We went to this bar we always went to on Friday night. And for some reason, everybody there that night was going to leave early. And I was sitting there going, man, what are you doing? I got the drugs. It's 6:30. Why is everybody going home? I thought it's Friday night. And they all left. Well, my sister did too. A couple minutes later, this girl comes in that knew my sister. And there was a girl at this other table that I knew from college. She actually dated a friend of mine, one of my best friends, for 5 years. I thought they were going to get married. I'd seen her a couple times in the past few weeks before this. And I'd filled out, had a goatee. I looked different than the last time she saw me. And she didn't recognize me. And I thought she was just being rude, like she never spoke to me. She spoke to all the other guys that were around at the same time as me in college with her. She didn't speak to me. So I see her and this girl comes over that knew my sister, was with her. And she says, hey, John, it's good to see you. Is your sister Amy being around? I said, you just missed her. We caught up about that for a second. And she says, hey, this girl over here wants you to come talk to her. And I looked over and I said, Angela? I said, what does she want? She goes, you know her? I said, yeah, I know her. And I've seen her 3 times lately. And she hadn't said a freaking word to me. What does she want to say now? She literally had come in. We were playing Golden Tee golf that night in the bar with like 4 of my buddies that she said hi to every one of them but me. And I'm going, what is her problem? So now she wants to talk. So she goes over and says something to Angela. I see her eyes get this big because she starts to realize, oh man, that's John. And I've known him and he was a friend of my boyfriend's forever. She calls me over anyway. I go sit down. We start talking. I had 2 friends that were still left there and they were about to go to another bar. And so they came over and said, hey, we're going to drop this guy off and we're going to go to this other place. I said, I'll go with you. And the guy looked at me and goes, no, I think you should stay. And I said, no, I'm going to go with you. Why would I stay? You're leaving. Why would I stay here? And he goes, I think you need to stay. And his name was Spanky. He looked like Spanky from the from the Little Rascals. And I said, Spanky, I'm going with you. And he goes, no, you need to stay. So next thing you know, I look over and I'm doing this and his neck's pointing at her, and I said, do you want me to stay? And she said, yeah. Well, that was the night that I met my wife.
Wow.
We started talking that night. I'd never met I knew her before, but like I never had a conversation like this. And man, she was gorgeous. I mean, I would have dated her in a heartbeat in college if my friend, hadn't, had a relationship with her. And even then in that moment, I'm going, my buddy's moved on. He's with a girl for 5 years. He's probably going to marry, but this is still like the brothers before women kind of thing. Like,
yeah.
Am I intruding here? Anyway, we talk all night, we have a few beers together. We go home. She gives me her number. The next night I call her, we go out and then we date for about a year and decide to get married. Now this whole time, Dan, I'm thinking, okay, I got to stop. Like I'm in love with this woman and I've never felt this way. And I got to cut out all these drugs. And she knew that we had done that in college, because she was around for some of that stuff. But she assumed at this time I was done with it. I'm 24 years old, 26 years old at this time, and figured I was past it, but I wasn't. So we decided to get married and I'm thinking, this is it, right? Like I'm going to mature. This is one of those life moments where you just magically, pixie dust falls from the sky and you're different, right?
Yeah. Cause that's
But
what we think of when we get married,
yeah, it's like,
life will be perfect after that.
Yeah. Everything's going to happen. Someday I'll change. That's everything I thought about on the couch is, this is normal. People do this kind of stuff. I'll get through it. We'll get.
She'll complete
done with
me.
this. Right. All of that. So, yeah. So she says yes. And we go to get married and we do. And man, I was doing cocaine all the way up to the marriage, and after. And so not long goes by and I'm still doing this, hiding it from her. And And I would do enough to get the feeling, but not enough to be obvious, something was
Yeah.
wrong. A year goes by and we decide, we decide we're going to have children. And when she comes to me one day and says, we're going to have a son, I'm pregnant. And then that was the greatest news I ever had in my life. I always wanted to be a father. I always wanted to be the best father I could. And I always wanted a boy. And I was getting that all
Yeah.
at once. And I was just jacked up about it. I'm going to teach him this and this and this.
Oh yeah.
And he was a joy of my life, but I was still doing the drugs. I didn't change for that. Right. Right in there, my mother a few years prior had found out she had breast cancer. So right at this time, Jacob was about a year old. I decided to go to a doctor's appointment with her in Memphis. I'd never been before to a doctor's appointment with her, period. My dad and my mother had moved down to the farm they grew up on, still had a house in Midtown Memphis, but we're down there all the time. Their doctors were here in Memphis. So one day I'm on a sales call working at Napa, and I said, I'm going to go see if they're still there and just say hi to them. I go in, I walk in the back, and that was the day that the doctor came in and told my mother that she had a couple of weeks to live, that the
Oh.
cancer had moved from her breast to her lungs to her lymph nodes and now to her brain. It's the first time I ever saw my dad cry in my life. I was devastated, man. I can't tell you what it's like to walk in a room and to just want to say hi to somebody and hear they're going to die.
Oh.
All of a sudden, all of these Thanksgivings and holidays and things where my mother had begged me to stay longer were regrets because I had to get back to the party. I didn't want to miss what was going on. And so, man, I followed them back to their house in Midtown, and my dad was going in there to get them some stuff to take down to Mississippi. They were going to go down there to try to process all of this. And I get out and I go to the car door and I open it and I just crumble into my mother's lap. She used to call me her cuddly duckling, and I used to crawl up in her lap all the time as a kid. I just fell into that same kind of place, kneeling outside the car and just laying on her and just sobbing, going, Mom, this isn't fair. Mom, this isn't right. She was a very holy person. She loved the Lord. She had done everything right in her life as far as her faith. And I just was crying. I was like, Mom, I don't want to lose you. I don't want you to die. And she just kept telling me, John, I'm prepared for this. Ever since the day they told me I had cancer, I've prepared for this and I know where I'm going. And man, I was torn up and I didn't want to hear that. Right. I didn't want to hear it. And, I knew my dad didn't want to talk. He came back to the car and my mom asked me to tell my sisters. So I had to tell my sisters, another
Oh.
equally hard chore to, hey, what are you doing, John? Nothing. Mom's going to die.
Oh.
And so they pull out of the driveway and I'm standing there watching them go down the street. And I just turned towards this porch. They had a high rise porch and there was a lot of cinder blocks or decorative blocks that was built on. And I walked over there and man, I kicked that block as hard as I could. Probably wasn't the smartest thing to do at the time, but I kicked it. And I just remember looking up and saying, Lord, I hate you. I hate you. I hadn't gone to church from the time I joined that fraternity until I met Angela. Angela was Catholic. She told me along the way that the man she was going to marry was me Catholic. I thought I was the man for the job and was chivalrous, giving up my faith that I didn't even practice anymore to marry her. And so I would go to mass under protest, but most of the time I didn't go at all because I was hungover. She felt I had sold her a bill of goods, right? And wasn't the person I said I was. And certainly she was right about that. But in that moment, I didn't have a relationship with God for the longest time anyway. And when I heard that my mother was going to die, I looked at it as he was taking her from me,
Yeah.
and I really just said, God, like, how can you let someone that is good and someone that has loved you without fail in all of her life, how could you take her and you let scumbag lying drug addicts like me get to live? Like, if that's the kind of God you are, I don't want anything to do with you. I'll never worship you again. I hate you. And I made what people would call an unholy vow, right? Like a holy vow is your marriage or the virtuous things you choose to do. And then unholy vows are like, I'll never be like my father, or I'll never love you, God, again. And those create wounds in us, right? And so I was devastated. I spent as much time as I could with my mother. I was angry that my son wouldn't get to know her because he was still, a 1 year old.
Yeah.
I would have no memories of her. I was angry about all that. And the only time I would ever let that stuff out was in the shower in the morning. I would blast music and just beat the shower and cry for a solid 2 minutes and then wipe the tears and get out and put on my mask and everything was okay. Angela knew something was wrong. She saw the way I was acting out, as bad as I was already. I just kicked it into overdrive. And started doing, $40 worth of Coke a night, which was a big bag of Coke from the guy I got it from, drinking as many beers as I could get down at night, using the same 12-pack box, but replacing the beers in it so Angela couldn't tell how much I was drinking, all of that. In the middle of all that, we decide we're going to have, or we find out we're going to have another child. And in fact, two children. We had twins, Allison and Caitlin, my 9-year-old girls. I was at the zoo with Jacob when she called and told me that she works at St. Jude and she had gone downstairs and somebody had ultrasounded her, and she calls and says, I hear two heartbeats. And I said, yeah, yours and the baby's. She goes, no, that would be 3. I believe my first response is, do you know how much daycare is going to be? But, when
we
I
all
was
say those things that come out of our mouth. We're only supposed to think them.
Right. I was at the zoo with Jacob. Like, I used to take him on Tuesdays because it was free, and we'd go an hour after I picked him up from daycare and no one would be there. And so we're staying in front of this gorilla pit. When she tells me, I'm like, yeah, two gorillas. And my son's like 40 yards walking off somewhere just because I'm in shock. But I get home, I embrace her, and we're just like, man, what a gift. But again, like, all right, this is it. Now we're gonna have 3 kids. My wife works full time. I've got this job. I've got to change, but I didn't. I just said, I can handle this, right? I got the world by the tail. I got a beautiful wife, got a house, got anything I want to buy. I'm the best salesman in my company. I got everything, because that's what the world tells us, right? That
so as much ego as you possibly could have, you have.
Yeah. And I thought, everybody's gonna be doing this. Nobody can even tell. I'm going to work all day long and selling 20 times more than anybody else on our team here locally, and taking care of my customers. I always did that. I always put them first, and went about sales as, if I take care of them, then I'll be taken care of. And that's how I grew a business that was successful for 23 years. So all that goes down, and one night I'm sitting there and I picked up this customer that had 5 locations in Memphis, a tire store, and they were very, very needy. They came from nothing, built a rags to riches story, but then they kind of forgot that. And so they wanted, everything had to be top tier, and you better take care of me. I'm taking my business somewhere else. I'll get text at night where they look at a price sheet wrong and then say, blankety blank Napa and I'm taking my business somewhere else at 9:00, not answer their phone. And I'd sit there all night fretting that I was going to lose my job or lose my money, because I was 100% commission salesperson. You lose that kind of income, you're done. Like, you're not making any money. So I really started just the stress. I was dealing with it through drugs and alcohol and pornography. My wife and I had become 2 ships passing in a night. She knew something was wrong. She knew that I had a good cover in my mother's death. So she thought that, like, this is just him trying to get through his mother, passing, but it wasn't. It was me addicted to things. So this one night I'm sitting out there, and it got to the point where Angela and I, again, we weren't being intimate. I was afraid to go back there and even try to be that way, because drugs affect your body.
Yes.
And I was afraid that I would go back there a couple times and not be able to perform the marital act. And she'd say, what's going on? Like, are you cheating on me? Are you this? Are you that? Or am I, all that stuff. So I just avoided. I stayed up as late as I could, made sure she was asleep, and I went back to bed, but I still had urges. So I'd watch porn every night, and before I go to bed. And this is where I was in my life. Well, one night about 2 a.m, I'm sitting there on the couch, and I got some baseball game playing in the background I didn't care about in case she walked up there. And I said, I got to go to bed. I got up, I went back to bed, and usually it took forever to go to sleep. But this night I went to sleep very quickly. And about 20 minutes after I've been asleep, I'm thrown up out of the bed. My heart feels like it's going to explode out of my chest. And I look over, she's still sleeping. I crawl out of the bed, crawl to our master bathroom, pull myself up on the commode, and I feel like I'm going to die. Like, my heart is just like this. And I thought, oh no, this is it. This is the after school special. This is what you see. Like, I've done it too long. I knew this day was going to come. And I thought I need to tell Angela to call an ambulance, but all I could tell myself inside was, I'd rather die right here than I'm going to lose everything, right? She'll take the kids, everything. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose everybody. Everybody's going to know. And so I grabbed a towel, I threw it in my face, and I slowed my breathing and realized I was having a panic attack. And I was able to crawl back into bed. And I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm throwing all this out in the morning. And I did. I poured the alcohol out, threw the drugs out. But 4:30 in the afternoon, I was back buying the drugs and back buying the alcohol. The next night, the same thing happens again. 2 a.m, bed, up, heart busting out of my chest. And that night, I didn't want to. I felt like I wanted to call out to God, but I hated him. and I wasn't going to do that. I was like, I don't need your help. Right. I know what your help looks like. And so I say, look, I'm not going to worship you. I'm not going to, but I know there's this men's, Catholic event coming up this weekend. My father-in-law was uber Catholic. He had, beat me into going to one 5 years before, where Father Larry spoke. It's where I've met him the first time. And he gave me his book, and I had written, underlined things in there, like 3 pages. It was going to change my life that, back in 2011. Well, here we were in 2017. And I made my mind up. I said, I've only been to confession one time, and that was during RCIA in the 11 years I've been Catholic. Maybe I'll go to confession and I can finally tell somebody the truth that can't tell anybody else. And so I go to this event. I don't even remember who the speakers are, but they've got, 40 priests there to hear confession. I'm walking down this hallway and I'm doing the walk of shame. I'm going, nope, I know him. Nope, I know him. Nope, I know him. Nope, I know him. And I finally find one from Batesville, Mississippi that I didn't know. And I go in there, and it's this crotchety priest, this kind of big, heavy set, older, looks angry to be there sort of priest. I'm like, great, shouldn't have picked door number 1, or whatever. And I go sit down. I don't even know how to start confession, And so he's looking at me, well, you going to go? I was like, are you going to go? Because I didn't know what I was doing. And so he tells me, and we get started. He's already annoyed, and I just pour out my soul, man. I'm crying. I'm telling him what a terrible dad I am. Because, man, I talked horribly to Angela. Everything was mine. I was so selfish. That's what drugs and all these things do. These addictions, they feed on that innate selfishness that we all have. It was my money. It was my house. It was my this, my rules. I was just a jerk, and I was a good dad when I wanted to be, which wasn't very often. So I pour all that out. And at the end of it, I say, I want to stop, but I don't want to get in trouble. And man, he loses it. And he's just like, what do you mean you want to get in trouble? This is about the mercy of God, and you better take this seriously. I was like, all right, man. Like, last time I went to confession, Jesus was much nicer than you, like, I don't. And, he's angry, and I get it. I said, look, I'm sorry. Like, what do I need to do next? And so he leads me through, what I need to say, and he gives me absolution. And I go home, and I'm like, I'm going to change my life. I go home that Saturday night, I pour out the drugs, everything, and I'm good for 4 days. Now that next week was Holy Week, and I did well, man. That first 4 days, it sucked. I'll tell you that. Like, I didn't realize how addicted I was until I stopped. I was gut wrenching. I would pull over at like 4 PM and throw up, because my body was so used to like 4:30, 5 o'clock. It's time to party, right? We're going to get the stuff. When I would tell myself that I wasn't going to go to the dealer, I would just retch, like my body would just react like, what do you mean? We got to have that. So I make it to Thursday, Holy Thursday. Customer calls me. I'd had a bid in for them for about $250,000 of equipment to expand their shop. And he called that day and said, I want it, bill it. And I was going to make more money on that sale than I made all year long. And so I run down there, I build the invoice, get him to sign it, call my boss, and I'm driving up 55 back to Memphis from Mississippi in my territory. And I'm thinking, I'm going to celebrate. Well, that celebrate for me meant drugs, meant alcohol. So I called the dealer about 30 times. He didn't answer. I was supposed to be going to get my son Jacob or my father-in-law on the other side of Memphis. I get almost over there, and he calls back, and I U-turn, and I go back down there. I pull up, I run in, I get $40 worth of cocaine, I come outside, look down, and notice that my gas gauge is on 0. I had a digital gas gauge at 0, and I was not in a nice part of town. So I pull up to the stop sign, and I turn and I gun it down to try to get to this gas station. I pull up at the pump. I go, all right, I made it. Good. All of a sudden I hear whoop, whoop. And I look up behind me, and the DEA is in a Tahoe behind me.
Oh,
they've been watching his house. So they grab me out of the car, throw me up against it, start yelling, where are the drugs? They pull them out, find them in my sock, throw me in the back of a Tahoe, and I'm on my way down to organized crime to get interrogated. They tell me I'm going to get out. They're going to let me go if I'll just help them, all that stuff. That they were just trying to get me to squeal on the guy and all that stuff. I wouldn't help. So they wound up putting me in another cop car to go downtown. I was actually with a guy that was in my fraternity who had been arrested that same day. We wound up in the same car going down there. So we pull up. There's these 2 officers. One's a young white guy, another one's a young African-American guy, and they're not happy because they were about to get off work, and now they're in this long line waiting to drop off prisoners. Memphis is a crime-ridden city, so there's no shortage of people being brought to jail every day. We're in this line, and the guy looks in the rearview mirror, and he says, hey man, you don't look like you've ever been in trouble in your life. And I said, I hadn't, man. I just made some bad choices, and I'm so sorry that I've done that. And all I want to do is call my wife. It's been 3 hours since I was supposed to pick up Jacob. So I knew she was like, is he dead? What's going on? Why can't I get a hold of him? So the police officer says, man, I've got your phone in the trunk. If you want me to call her, we can call her. And I just looked at him and I said, I'm worried about what she's going to say. I'm worried about what she's going to do. And he said, well, is this about her? Or is it about you? And, you know, Dan, as I look back over the story, I could see the places where God was, and he was certainly in that cop, and he was showing me like, your whole life's been about you. You know, your whole life's been about you. Like, when's it not going to be about you? Look at where being about you has got you. So he pulls my phone out of the trunk. He puts it to my ear. I call her. She answers. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Where are you? John, where are you? Everybody's been looking for you. Are you hurt? Are you okay? I said, Angela, I'm in the back of a police car on the way to downtown Memphis. On the way to prison in downtown Memphis. I got arrested for the possession of cocaine. And there was silence. And she said, John, I hate you. And she hung up the phone. And I didn't blame her. I mean, she knew something was going on and she had her answer, you know, and only thing that gave me solace was like, she knew I wasn't dead. But I had to turn my mind into, I'm going into one of the jail in one of the most dangerous cities in the country. So they take me in there. You got to take off your belt and all that stuff. They put you in these cattle chute looking things that open up into a drunk take room where they bring everybody. I'm sitting in there watching guys fight. Well, I saw a guy get stabbed. I saw deputies beat down a guy, like all kind of crazy stuff. You know, it's 4 a.m. I'm getting a mug shot. I hadn't slept. I'm still in my work clothes. You know, it's starting to get real. Like, I'm not getting out of this, right? I'm a sales guy. I get out of everything, but I'm not getting out of this, you know, especially when I'm holding the mug shot and doing the law and order stuff. So 4 a.m, they call me back and they say, you know, go get in that line. They're going to give you your stuff in here, you know, your toilet paper, your blankets, your scrubs, all that. So there was a phone there. They told me I could make a phone call. I called Angela at 4 a.m. She said, John, I know where you are. I don't care. I've got to get to work and take the kids to school. You can rot in there. Hangs up the phone. I go over there. I get scrubs. I'm worried they're not going to have shoes that fit because I wear a size 16, and miraculously they did. I'm like, I can't find shoes at the store, but you guys got them in here. That's crazy. So I get in this line and they take me down to this cell block, and that's where it got real. You know, I didn't go to some cush floor where people were playing checkers. I was in, you know, a cell block, and I go down to the end. I watch the door open. I step in and see this bunk bed of nasty stains and all this, and a stainless steel toilet in a 6x6 room. I turn around with all my stuff in my hand, and because they tell us to, and I see this door just do boom, and hear that lock close. I'm like, that's it. My life's over. You know, for the first time since I'm a kid, I can't go where I want to go. I can't eat when I want to eat. If I want to go to the bathroom, I got to do it in front of God and everybody. So I turned around, I was exhausted. I'd been up for, 24 or 28 hours at this time. I'll turn around, look at this nasty bed. I throw a blanket down. I crawl in the blanket. I throw one over me. And by the grace of God, I passed out face down on the bed. Well, the next morning I wake up a couple hours later and I'm like, oh my gosh, thank God this is a dream. I'm still under this blanket. You know, it's a nightmare. I'm going to quit. Thank you for this wake up call. I'll never do this again. I sit up, my head hits the bottom of a steel bunk bed and the covers fall off. And I realize I'm in jail. I throw my legs over the side of the bed. I start rocking back and forth and going, no. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose my wife, my kids, my job, my house, everything. Everybody's going to know. Everybody's going to know. I thought I was going to have a heart attack, man. Like that heart started beating again. There was guys staring at me from the other side of the cell block. And I'm just going, no. And thinking about how this house of cards that I had built was going to fall apart. And then the craziest things happened, Dan, like this peace came over me that I cannot explain and should not have had in the moment. All of a sudden I stop rubbing, my heart slows down, and I just put my head down and I start tearing up. And the truest things I've ever said came out of my mouth. I just said, at least now I don't have to lie anymore. At least now everyone will know who I am. You know, I carried that burden for 17 years of my life of hiding a secret. You know, building a house of cards. And dude, people ask me all the time, what's the worst part about addiction? There's a lot of bad things, but one of the worst things is the lying, because you never remember what you've told anybody. People would come up to me and say, hey, John, there a day when you said, and I would just freeze. I'm like, what did I say? What did I do? What if I tell them I was somewhere different than I was? Or what if all of that? So all that fell off of me, and I just began to cry. And I said, like, how did I get here, man? Like, how did my life wind up here? This is not who I was supposed to be. And my mind went right back to that day I joined the fraternity and the day that I stopped going to church and I left Jesus behind in my life. And so I started to cry, and I started to remember what I said to him at my parents' house. And I started to remember all the times I told him I hated him and the things I'd said to him. And I just hit my knees in that jail cell day. And I said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You have done nothing but try to be there all my life. And I've done nothing but run from you. And look what it's gotten me. I've tried my way, and look what it's gotten me. And Lord, if you will love me again, I know that I'm not worth it. I know I'm dirty and I'm broken and I'm so pitiful and but if you'll have me, I'm yours. Like, I'll do whatever you want. If you will just allow me a chance to be with my wife and kids, if you'll make Angela not leave me, if I will do whatever you want to do, my life is yours. And I hit my knees and I gave my life to Jesus in that cell that day. And I got back up and I sat down and I began to think, all right, I can't control what's going on now. Like, I don't know when I'm getting out of here. Nothing's in my control, but what is in my control is praying and talking to God and building this relationship again and starting to figure out how I'm going to be different. Well, shortly after that, the door opened, to the cell, and I kind of stick my head out and I'm like, is this a malfunction? Should I make a run for it? Like, I don't like,
right.
Is this a jailbreak? Like, I don't know. And the bailiff comes down. It was a female bailiff, which I thought was odd on a male cell block, but she said, look, you have 30 minutes, phone call and a shower. Well, I'd seen a lot of prison movies, quite frankly. I wasn't really interested in the shower part. So I figured I'll go take the phone call. Well, the phone situation was a box with a speaker with no headset. So I'm sitting there trying to figure this out with all these people yelling at each other and noise. I call everybody I know. I can't hear anything. I get the guy next to me in the cell block reaches out, gives me an empty toilet paper roll. I put it to my ear and put it to the phone, and I can hear. Another moment where God was there through somebody I completely didn't expect him to show up at. I thought that this guy could have shivved me, from as close as I was standing to his shell, and he hands me a thing and helps me. So I call everybody, all those brothers for life in my fraternity, nobody would answer the phone. All the money I'd spent, all the things I'd done for them, nobody would answer the phone. Lonely, lonely, lonely feeling. I finally get a hold of my sister at my dad's, and she says, John, we know where you are. We know what's happened. Angela's across the street trying to bail you out. She's not going to let you come home. She's going to go to her parents, but we're going to come get you. I'm going to come get you, take you to your house to get clothes. And then we're going to take you to dad's because she doesn't want you to come home. You have a court date Monday. So I was relieved to hear that. I went back to cell. A few minutes later, they tell me I have a visitor, and I walk out, and it's a Law and Order scene with the glass and the payphone and all that. And it's my wife and my mother-in-law. They're crying. I start crying immediately. I start saying, I'm sorry. And Angela just puts a hand up and she says, stop. She said, I'm not going to divorce you, but it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with the vows I made to God in the church that day. And all I heard in the moment was, I'm not going to divorce you. And literally that's all I cared about. Right. Like, I was just like, okay, my mother-in-law was crying, but I don't know if it was tears of hate or tears of sorrow or whatever. She says, look, you're going to come home. I'm not going to be there. I'm going to be at the parents. You're going to get your clothes. You're going to go to your dad's. I said, okay. Like, I didn't have much say in the matter. Right. So I go back about 9:00 that night on Good Friday. I come out of jail. So I've gone in on Holy Thursday. I come out on Good Friday. I go outside to look for my sister, and it's not my sister. It's my father.
Oh,
now, you and I talked about my father in the beginning.
yeah.
So you can imagine, even at, I guess he was probably 78, 79 years old then. I'm well bigger than him, 6'8", 275. But I'm walking up like a little kid that broke something in the house, and I'm waiting for that chastisement, a slap in the face, maybe something. And I walk up and I said, Dad, and I looked up, and he just looked at me and he smiled and he said, I love you. And he put his arms around me and he pulled me to him and he said, are you all right? He said, let's go, son. Let's get in the car and let's go to your house and let's make our way back to the farm. It's late. So I get in the car, I realized I got a bazillion calls from work, and I know some of them must have found out, and they did. I was in some Just Busted magazine somebody saw and ratted me out to everybody. So now I had to call my boss, and they told me, go to your dad's, come here after your court date, and we'll figure out what we got to do. So I go to my dad's. That Sunday, I had the greatest desire I think I've ever had in my life to go to mass. All I could think about was how my Italian wife was going to be with her huge Italian family. And when she walked into the house, all the roar of noise would go silent, and there would be the elephant in the room. And that was just weighing on me so tremendously. So I wound up asking my dad, I said, can I borrow your car? Can I go to mass? There was a small Catholic room in this town of Bruce, Mississippi. And he said, yeah, I'd been there once before with Angela at Christmas when she made me go. And so we go, I drive down there. My dad's not Catholic, so I went by myself. I pull up and nobody's there. It's Easter Sunday. And I'm going, really, God, really? Nobody's here? So all of a sudden this nun pulls up, the sister that had helped there because they had a traveling priest. So she did a lot of things that when he wasn't there. And she saw me beating the steering wheel and stuff. Probably thought I was nuts and said, what are you doing? I said, I just want to go to mass. And she said, we're down the road, right? We're down the road at the 4-H club. It's, it's too many people here. So we had to go down there. So I go down there. This priest that had been there the night that Angela and I went one time before gave the homily. It was amazing. And I decided right then and there, I'm going to be a different man. And so I get up to leave and I grab the door and I'm walking out the door. And this hand hits my shoulder. And I'm like, who's touching me? I don't know anybody in here. And it's this priest. And I turn around. He says, hello, John. He remembered my name from 5 years before. And I said, Father, and he goes, I don't know why your family's not here or where they are, but I want you to know that God told me to tell you everything's going to be all right. And I just was like, how could you know? And he turns and he said, I hope to see you again soon. And he walks off. They're having a potluck and he goes and disappears in the crowd of people. I walk out to my dad's car and I'm like, what the hell? Excuse my French, but I'm like, what just happened? And I made my mind up right then and there, like, I'm going to change my life. I'm going to be different. So we drove up to Memphis the next day. I went to court. There was a Catholic judge in town and he doesn't like sentencing people back to jail. He wants to give people a chance to better themselves. So I got put on a program called diversion and I had to go to parole hearings every month and take drug tests. And after a year, it would go off my record. So I did that. I went to work right after that. And they had a list of questions, and they were all the HR people and all that, did you do it at work? Have you done it here? This, that, and that. And I was yesing and knowing all the answers.
Sounds like the Pete Rose thing. Did you bet on baseball?
Yeah, that's right.
As long as you didn't bet on baseball.
That's right.
Okay.
So in that moment, I was just like, I don't care if I lose my job. I've been here 23 years. I've never been in trouble. If you want to fire me, fire me. But I had made my mind up that I was going to go down to the Behavioral Science Center and check myself in to prove to my wife that I was serious about getting better. I had not talked to her since Friday night at the jail. So my dad takes me down to this place called Lakeside. I go in, and one person they bring in is worse than the next. Man, there's guys on meth, scratching their skin off and bleeding because they think bugs are on them. Their parents have got them by the pants, just throwing it, take them. This is the 12th time. I'm done. I made my dad go sit in the car, and I'm sitting there in this room with the door where people keep coming in over my right shoulder. And I pick up a newspaper that was there. It was like a gift from God to be able to just put it up and not even read it, but not have to look at this anymore. Well, people kept walking by and all of a sudden the door opened and nobody walked by. The paper didn't move or anything like that. And I lowered the paper and I looked up and it was my wife.
Oh, wow.
And I said, Angela, what are you doing here? How did you know I was here? And she said, John, I'm mad as hell at you, but I can't let you go through this alone.
Oh.
And so she sits there with me holding my hand until they call me back to be assessed. And then the lady's telling her, I need to be, a 30-day outpatient. And my wife's like, no, put him under the place, put him as deep in this place as you can and fix him, And I'm like, Angela, she's a professional. She probably knows what she's talking about. So I went in this 30-day outpatient program and, I was off work until after that. So I get home I don't know where I'm going. Right. So my dad's going to have to drive me 2 hours one way a day to go to this rehab center for 30 days because I'm not allowed to go home. So Angela and I are walking out and I'm just telling her, I can't believe the type woman that she is and why are you here and all that. And I'm like, where's my dad? How am I going to get home? And she said, John, I told him to go home. I'm not going to make him drive up here every day. The kids need you. Allison asked the other day if you're dead. She was 3 years old. My 3-year-old wanted to know if I was dead because she hadn't seen me in 4 days. So I go home that night and I get in my bed and I'm like king of the hill, right? I got air conditioning. I'm not eating pig slop. There's TV, and Angela told me, I'm not going to sleep in the bed with you. I can't, man. Like I gotta, I'm going to be in Jacob's room. So his room was right across from ours and his bed, I could see from my side of the bed. So I'm sitting there all fat and happy because I'm home again. And I look over and I realize there's nobody in the bed with me. And I started to realize I can't just stop doing drugs and alcohol. I got to be different, And so I start to look for a Catholic Bible. I look for a Bible, any kind of Bible. on my side of the room. I can't find it. I probably should have looked on hers. There's like 40 of them over there. But I pull the drawer open next to me and I find Father Larry's book from 2011 that I'd started underlining. And I read that book from cover to cover that night and started figuring out what it meant to be a man. Angela got up in the morning and said, "What are you doing up so early?" I said, "I never went to sleep. I read this book." And Angela, "I'm going to be the man you deserve." And then for that year after that, I read scripture like it was going out of style. And all these Baptist roots. I mean, we read the Bible 6 times before we were 13, had sword drills. I could quote Bible verses to you all day long. And all of that started coming back to me. I started going to church every day. There was a priest where I walked in there one day hiding from the world that saw me crying in the church and took me to the confessional and heard my story and has walked with me from that day ever since. You know, he asked me that day to be a lector. He told me to come to confession once a week. He asked me to come to daily mass every day, saved my life, gave me the Eucharist after that. And it was the first time I really believed it was the body of Christ, was in that moment. So I started reading 70 Catholic books. I'm going about my life. Nobody knows what's going on. I've gotten involved in the parish coaching and all these things and the men's club, but none of those guys know what's going on. Come back to that men's conference a year later. And I go, and this time I'm like excited to go. And, you know, I'm living my faith now. At least Angela and I aren't completely healed. We're still getting through things, but I'm a better man than I have ever been in a while. So I go to this event, Father Mike Schmidt spoke, and then there was a witness speaker that was a focus missionary that had a similar story, and he told it. And I just was like, oh my gosh, this courage and this bravery of this young man to get up there and share all this. So I find him, I talk to him, I tell him that, you know, our stories are similar. Well, that night we had a fundraiser at our parish, and it was a 3-point shootout. And I went up there with my son, and there was another guy that had been there that day and went to confession for the first time in 16 years. And he was going nuts, man. He was running around the place, "Man, I feel awesome. And I can't believe, like, man, I went to confession today. Whoa." You know, and he's telling everybody everything he did in confession. I'm like, "Hey, Jay, some of that stuff, there's women and children here, man. Like, you need to quit yelling." And he's like, "Dude, I don't understand why I feel like this." And I said, "Well, you had a experience with the Holy Spirit." "I'm cradle Catholic, man, all my life. I don't know anything about the Spirit. I know God and Jesus. What are you talking about?" So he starts asking me. I start to tell him, and the devil hits me in the back of the head. And he's like, "Man, who do you think you are, you cokehead? You're going to sit here and tell anybody about how to live their life and what Jesus is?"
Imposter syndrome. Oh,
yeah. Yeah. And so I told him, I said, "Jay, there's a couple of priests here. I'm sure they're too busy to talk about it tonight, but I'm sure they'd set up a time to talk to you." "No, man, I want you to talk to me. I'm sorry. I'm understanding what you're saying. You know, you're doing it in a real way." I said, "I don't want to." And he kept hammering me and hammering me. And finally he said, "Can I take you to dinner Tuesday night?" I said, "Yeah." So I go home and tell Angela, and she's like, "Really? What are you going to do? Like, no one knows. What are you going to tell them?" And I said, "Angela, I've been studying and all this stuff's coming back to me. I don't know." But I sat down after church that Sunday and I wrote out like 6 pages on legal pad. We went and ate at a pizza place Tuesday night. I had books everywhere. I looked like a lawyer when he showed up, you know, and I'm like, "Let's go." And I took him from the Holy Spirit, from the breath over the water, all the way to Pentecost. And when I was done, he's like, "Man, this is amazing. How do you know all this?" I said, "I don't know. I just do." And he goes, "You got to start a men's group." And I said, "Dude, I can't. Can't. Sorry. No, not my thing. I told you I'd do this. That's it, man. This was the deal." And he's like, "No, dude, why do you always say no?" And I felt convicted by the Spirit. And I told him everything I just told you. And I went, blah. And I expected him to get up and say, "Check, please." You know, and next thing you know, he looks at me and he says, he says, "Man, that's amazing. You should start a men's group." So I'm going to do something wrong with you. Did you not hear what I said? Like, I was just arrested on a felony, drug charge a year ago. I'm probably not the person that needs to be leading a men's group. He convinced me. A week later, we called 30 men in the parish, didn't tell them what we were doing, just called them to a room. And I showed up that night to tell my story. I knew I had to. Angela wasn't real happy about it, but I just felt the Lord convicting me to do it. I walk up to the door to grab the door to walk in that room. And as soon as my hand hits the handle, I hear the devil go, "What are you doing? You're going to lose everything. You go in there and you do what you're going to do. You're going to lose all those friends. All these people that don't know you, they're going to talk about you. Your kids are going to get kicked out of this parish when they find out of school, when they find out you're an ex-drug user. You're going to get kicked out of this parish. Think how embarrassed your wife's going to be staying with a loser like you." All that stuff. And I let go of the door and I started to walk back to the parking lot.
ooh.
And I got about 2 steps and I heard that small whisper say, "John, you told me you were going to be different. You told me when you walked out of that cell, you were going to be different." It was like the whisper you hear in the Old Testament. God's not in the earthquake or the storm. He's in the whisper. And so I turned around, I opened that door, and I walked in there, and all the guys were grumbling, "What are we doing here, man? Why are we here?" And And I just said, look, guys, we have a great men's club. We cook barbecue and raise money and all that stuff, but we never talk about Jesus. And let me tell you what can happen in your life when that's the case. And I just went blah. And I just regurgitated everything I said, just to you right now. And I was crying and scared to death. And at the end of it, I said, look, I don't know what I'm doing, but I think we need a men's group here where we can talk about our struggles. I can't be the only one that struggles. And I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to start one if you want to be a part of it. But if you want to leave, I get it. You didn't know why you were here. This isn't entrapment. You can go. And I sat down, man. I'd given everything I had. I was sobbing. And next thing you know, Jay, the guy that asked me to go to dinner, stands up. And I'm like, surely you're not the one leaving. You're the one that got me into this mess. Like, and I look up and he's crying. And he says, I'm a terrible father. I care more about my job and my money and my work than I do my family by the way I spend my time. And he sits down, and the next guy says, I'm addicted to pornography and my wife's going to leave me. The next guy gets up and says, I'm getting a divorce and none of you know it. Next guy, I'm smoking pot and doing pills all the time. My wife's going to leave me. The next guy stands up and says, I'm drunk right now. I Ubered here. My wife and I have 9 kids. We fight a lot. I escape. She stays at the house. She thinks I'm at work. I've been in a hotel room all day. I've had a case of beer. I came up here. I Ubered here because I thought we were going to have more beer. And he said, and my work thinks I'm at home sick. All the way around this room, pistons in an engine, like guys getting up, sitting down, telling their sins. And that's the night that God showed me vulnerability in my life. And that's the night that we started a men's group in Memphis, Tennessee at Holy Rosary Catholic Church. And what really launched this ministry, we've been meeting every Wednesday night for 6 years, except for the week of Christmas and Thanksgiving, showing up and doing life together with a bunch of men. Dan, I know I've talked a long time and I'm sorry for taking so long.
No.
But it's, vulnerability with men. We think that means that we're weak, right? Like my father used to say, put your head down, never complain. Don't, work hard. Don't need anybody. And so we walk through life like this one-man army that can't tell anybody anything because it means we're weak, right? The world has that definition of vulnerability, which is, you're weak, you're susceptible to attack, you're less masculine, all those things. But God has a different definition, and he gives it to St. Paul. He tells St. Paul, when St. Paul says, remove this thorn from my side, right? 3 times. And God says each time, no, my power is made perfect in weakness. My power is made perfect in weakness. And so St. Paul goes on to say, once he learns that lesson, that if I'm to boast, let me boast of only my burdens, my hardships, my difficulties, because when I'm weak, I'm strong. And what it means, vulnerability, there's power and strength in vulnerability. It's not our strength, it's God's. But when we humble ourselves, right, when we're brought to that moment to say, I can't do it anymore, my life's out of control, right? Whether it's anger issues or porn or addictions of other kinds or anything in your life that's a sin, that you get mired down in those habitual and repetitive sins, we have to humble ourselves and become vulnerable in 3 ways, really. With ourselves, we have to admit we have a problem. I knew I had a problem on that couch every single night, but I never admitted it. Oh, other people do this. I'll be okay. Look at my life. I came to grips with that in that jail cell, that at the place I'd gotten myself, I had no way out, that Jesus was the only one that could do something for me that I could not do for myself. And so I was vulnerable in that moment. And then I went to the confessional with that priest, and I was vulnerable with him, with God. And I received his mercy and his forgiveness, which so many men run from because we look at God as this punishing, angry God, but he's not. He's this father, like in the prodigal son. I was the guy in the pig. I was the son that was in the pig slop, covered in the pig crap and the food and all that stuff, who walked my way home, who stood up that one day and said, even my father's servants have it better than I do.
Yeah.
Right. Who went home, and that father wasn't standing there with a switch or with a chastisement. He was standing there looking down that road at the horizon, waiting day by day for his son to return to him. And when he did, the father didn't go take a shower. Right. He didn't say, I don't want you here. He ran down there and he said, he celebrated, right? He takes his finest robe and puts it on him. He gives him his finest ring. He embraces him. He calls for the slaughter of the fattened calf, and he hugged him in all of that dirtiness and that shame and that guilt and that disgustingness. And he welcomed him home. And that's what vulnerability does for us. That's what God wants to do for us. He's not a guy that's standing with his back turned to you in disgust. He's waiting for you to turn back to him. He's not the one that leaves us. We're the ones that leave him. And the devil lives in that, Dan. Like, he gets in those wounds and he says, you know what? Look at what you've done. Look at who you are. God can't love you. You really think he wants you back? And so I was in a physical prison cell, a mortar and bars and all these things, Dan. But like every one of us is walking around in a virtual prison cell with four walls made up of our own shame, guilt, mistakes, failures, all that stuff. And every time you try to reach for that door, the devil pokes and prods in those wounds. They really are like wounds. He goes, up, you go out that door, they're going to find out about your porn problem. You go do what you're going to do. They're going to find out about the way you talk to your wife, about how you drink, about all this other stuff. And so you let go of that door and he convinces you it's comfortable in there, right? Out there's nothing but pain and torture and loss. But when you become vulnerable, man, with yourself, God, and other men, which I did in that group that night and still do to this day, then when he comes back, when you grab that door and he shoves his finger in that wound's not there anymore, right? Because you've shared it with the people that it matters, with yourself, with God, and with other people. And you found out that they didn't leave you, they didn't abandon you, they accepted you for who you are. And you realize that your strength comes from God and that your purpose is a beloved son of God. That's who you are. That's what your identity is. Not what you do, not what you have, any of that other stuff. You don't have to earn it. You're worthy simply because God says so. To be vulnerable, the root word of vulnerability is vulnus. In Latin, that means wound. That literally means wound. So we become vulnerable. We rip that wound off and we let the divine healer heal it. And that's what he's done in my life. So I started this group, and then people in the diocese started coming to it from all over. We had a bunch of Protestants start coming, and they converted because they found a place to be real and authentic where men would accept them for who they are, and they were looking for that all their life. So I had a deacon here that has a show on EWTN, a radio show called The Catholic Cafe. It's Deacon Jeff Brzezinski. He came up to me in a Cursillo group one night and said, I want you to do what you're doing on a podcast. And I thought, man, get out of here. I have no idea how to do that. Who wants to listen to me? And he said, I think a lot more people than what you would think. He said, what would you call it? And I said, just a guy in the pew. And he said, how did you come up with it that quick? I said, that's what the old women in church, when I'd go every day, would come up to me and ask if am I in the seminary or am I a deacon? And I'd say, no, I'm just a guy in the pew. And that's where that name came from. But Dan, we started doing that. We started doing episodes. We've now got the podcasts listened to in over 150 countries around the world. You know, we've got 160 something episodes. We do interviews with all these folks. I travel the country and speak. We do parish missions. And right now, God's got us squarely focused on using some materials we have called the Narrow Road, which is a virtue-based program that men can get involved in. And then we go to parishes and help start groups like we started at Holy Rosary. And it's changing parishes. You know, when we started that group, the women got inspired. They started groups. The children got inspired. The youth group grew, and our parish transformed. And so that's what I want to do with my life. I want to give back to the Lord because he has done so much for me.
Yes.
And so there's my story.
Well, thank you.
Sorry, I'm glad I was able to finish that very quickly.
Yeah. So a couple quick takeaways. I can't hit on every point, but like,
sure.
As soon as we think we're so far away that we're not recoverable, in your story, God's like, hey, come on, man. I got you. Like so many different instances throughout that. It's like, no, it's okay. You did make some mistakes, but you're still mine. You're still a son of God. So wherever you are in your journey, like it doesn't matter. God's going to take you back. So I know I've been at spots in my life where I thought, man, I've been gone too long, or I've been away too long, or made too many mistakes or whatever. And once you realize that if you just listen, if you just believe, if you just trust, God's there. You know, the first time I came back to church after I'd been gone for a while, of course it was the prodigal son. And of course the homily was, I was the only one in the pew. There wasn't a soul in this 1,200 person church. It was only me and him. Of course there was 1,100 other people there. However, it felt like it was just me and him. But
well, that's my favorite line in that parable is when it says the father saw the son coming from a long way off and rushed out to meet him.
Oh, and when you're getting out of the jail and your dad's there. And what's the thing you want him to say most in your whole entire life? And instead of saying, man, you messed up. You messed up. Instead of saying that, he says, son, I love you.
And that's the thing, man, is like you said, I mean, if you argue with God about your worth, you're the one who's wrong, because he loves you and he's never going to stop loving you. And there's never anything you can do to lose his love, because you didn't earn it. It was a free gift, and it's a gift that he's going to give you constantly in your life. And it's just like us, you know, our kids do things that disappoint us. Doesn't mean we hate them. Doesn't mean we're going to abandon them. We're going to kick them out of the house. It just means that we're disappointed and we hope that we can help them right the ship. And that's what God wants to do in our life, because each and every one of us has a purpose. And until we realize that our identity is a beloved son of the Father, not what I do, not what I produce, not what I have, then our whole life is going to be a constant search for, what am I doing here? What's the purpose of all of this? And that's how we find ourselves falling into vice and all these other things, is because God has kept a piece of our heart for himself. And he knows one day we're going to come looking for it. And when we find it and we put it back, then that's when we start to figure out who we are. You know, I had a lot of gifts as a salesperson. Those gifts weren't for selling auto parts. Those gifts were for helping people to come find the Lord. And I have that purpose in my life, and my life is full of joy. Do I struggle? Yes. Am I broken? Yes. Does my wife think I need to listen to what I preach a lot? Yes. You know, but we've healed our relationship. And I make less money than I've ever made in my life, but I'm more joyful than I've ever been, because I'm living in my gifting and I'm living in the purpose that God gave me, and I'm bringing other people to him. And that is what he made us for. And when we could find that, uniquely find that, doesn't matter if it's helping at the soup kitchen. It doesn't matter if it's being an excellent father, whatever it is that he's calling you to, that's where you're going to find your joy. And that's where you walk away from vice and towards virtue, which is what we need to get to heaven.
So two things.
Yeah.
When you were young, you're talking about basketball and a stress reliever, shooting a bunch of shots, being in the zone, way to get away from things. Then later on, you mentioned, as a stress reliever, I did some cocaine and like really went crazy with it. Like I really took it to another level. So guys, whatever the stresses are in your life, find a healthy way, find a healthy outlet. And a lot of it can be talking to another guy. A lot of it can be in a faith group. A lot of it can be talking to God and asking for forgiveness. It can be working out. It can be all these different things. But if you're turning to drugs, alcohol, pornography, any of those things, stop for a second and go, is that the way I want to stay? Do I want to stay in this lane? Do I want to get really good in this lane? Or do I want to go try something new, try something different? So I'm going to encourage you to try something different. John's lived it. John's telling you where you're going to end if you go that road and get really good at that side of it. So if you know somebody that needs to hear this message, share this podcast all over the place, share John's words with them. And he does have a cool program. I was hoping we were going to get to talk a little bit about Nimrod today too, but we don't have time.
Sorry about that. We'll do it again.
Yes,
right?
yes.
That story's just having you back. That story's hard to calm down once it gets going.
Absolutely, it's awesome. But he's got a narrow road group. It's a monthly subscription thing that's super cool. I'll drop a link in the comments or in the show notes to it. But guys, oh my goodness. John, so I was like shaken and emotional, and I was ready to curl up in a ball and cry like you were talking.
It was a rough ride, man. But you know, the other point I want to make real quickly is, guys, we're all going to suffer. And, you know, as Catholics, you know, we're taught, and we should really believe that suffering is an invitation to grow. You know, I try to look at it when I'm going through things in my life that are tough, that God is trying to move me from one place to the other, right? It's not a punishment. It's not a chastisement. I mean, just like with Job, right? I mean, God is the answer to suffering, right? That is the answer to our suffering. And so he wants us to come closer to him. And when we suffer through things, there's a purpose to it. You know, Ansel and I easily could have said, you know what, this was a terrible part of our life, and just kept it to ourselves. But my wife was a strong enough person to realize that the suffering was not just to suffer. It was to help other people. God's using this example of my life to help so many others. And what an honor it is to look at suffering that way. You know, we're not going to have a suffering-free life. And so if you look at it as, man, God's calling me as an opportunity to grow closer to him, and to maybe rid myself of some things in my life, to cleanse myself of some things, we flip that perspective on suffering, and we really start to find the purpose of it, and to see the good in it, and even pray for it, right? A lot of saints prayed to suffer. So there's that. And then one more thing I'll tell you, Dan, real quick, is for guys that are hearing the negative, guys that are that we're really going to struggle with the negative things they're hearing in their life. There's always two voices in your head, right? I mean, how many times in a day have you sat there and you felt like you've had a conversation with somebody all day and you've never said a word because it's in your head, right?
Yes.
And it's that negativity of you're not good enough. You'll never be the one. You can't, God can't love, you know, all of those accusatory yous.
I heard the other day, 80% of the thoughts that we naturally have are negative.
Right. And that's the devil. That is the accuser. He's the one, that's what scripture calls him, the accuser of our brother, the father of lies, right? God speaks in love. God speaks in the whisper. God is, I love you. You are good enough. You are worth it. So what we need to do in our life every day is when we start to hear those voices that are not of God, we need to recognize that and cast that out, because that's how we find ourselves in those holes. Well, I'll never be as holy as Dan. I'll never be as good as so-and-so. I'll never, so why even try? And then we find ourselves going to the bottle or going to porn or going to drugs or going to whatever else, anger issues and all those other things that are out there. So if I could give any advice to you, if you're hearing those things in your life, start paying attention to the voices in your head, what they sound like and who they're coming from. Because if you start looking at the positive side of things, you start listening to God's voice and you start to trust and let go of that steering wheel. So many of us are white knuckling that steering wheel as guys. We want to control everything. But as soon as you let go and you let him have it, you're going to realize that so many things in your life that matter don't matter. What matters is him and his opinion and what he wants you to do. And you start listening to that voice, that negativity starts to subside and you really start finding joy in your life.
That's perfect. We always like to end it off with a challenge, and I didn't even ask you for a challenge, and you put it out there. So that was awesome. So guys,
Yeah.
take those thoughts captive this week, write them down. What are those voices you continually hear, and change your thinking, transform your mind. And I promise you, I've done it before. I still do it. I always do it. When those negative thoughts come in, you recognize them and you can change them. And with practice, you can change them much, much faster. And that joy really comes into your life.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen. Well, I appreciate you so much, John. Thank you so much, guys. Check out the show notes on this one. And man, if you know somebody that could use this, share this podcast with them and share John's podcast. It's really cool, called Just a Guy in the Pew. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Dan. It's a joy to be with you, brother.
Absolutely.